My Pride Animals collection has been slowly growing since 2015, both the year I began painting with watercolors and the year that gay marriage was legalized in the United States. This year we are adding not one, but two mythical pieces to the collection. Often these two identities can go hand in hand, but it was important to me that each got their own piece, so two this year it will be. We're starting with the Aromantic flag, Aro for short, which consists of greens, white, gray, and black. There is already some awesome aromantic animal art out there and lots of opinions about what the official mascot should be. For my piece, I decided to go with the Gryphon to pair with the theming that I already had in mind for the Ace piece that we'll see later on in this video. One of my earliest watercolor paintings back in 2015 was another griffin with the head of a peacock and the body of a black leopard. I knew I wanted to do another unique animal mashup, so I took to Pinterest to compile some references. I wanted to use a naturally green bird, so I looked for taracos, kingfishers, swifts, and the like. To pair with them, I chose a small cat from the region of the world that each corresponding bird lives in. One of my finalists was a green kingfisher and a margay, both from Central and South America. I really loved how the pose and colors turned out. The second finalist was a guinea taraco paired with a black-footed cat, both from Africa, though admittedly their ranges don't entirely overlap. While the color banding isn't quite as strong in this particular mashup, Instagram loved this little cutie, so it's the one I moved forward with. I looked everywhere for the missing footage at the very start of this painting, and I could not find it anywhere, so I am very sorry, but I promise the most interesting aspects of the painting are yet to come. The first wash of the body was just laying in our base colors, a green mixed from cobalt teal and lemon yellow, and Denise's gray. After that was dry, I began on the wing with stormy blue, then I transitioned to Denise's gray, and finally back to the green mixture. As we move on to the more fun part of the painting, we are adding in all of the details. Starting on the head with a silver black velvet brush, I am carefully layering in loose feather textures. This second layer of green has a bit of phthalo turquoise added to the previous mix to add a bit more depth. My technique, as usual for the feathers, is to lay in wet paint on the dry paper, then soften off the edges, which gives me fine control over how far those washes extend onto the paper. The wings on this piece were actually especially tricky to balance, and I'm not sure if they ended up quite where I wanted them to. When the guinea taraco's wings are tucked and folded, they look like compact little wedges without a lot of detail. I tried to stay true to that in my rendition, but it might have looked more convincing in the painting if I had added some of those distinguishable flight feathers. The cap portion of this griffin was easier to navigate. My goal was to make it look as fluffy as possible. Denise's gray is really good at helping me with that, as when it dries, it gently separates into the soft blue and earthy red colors that go into the convenience color. Fairly obviously, the black-footed cat is called such because the undersides of its feet and back legs are dark in color. So in comes the stormy blue once again. Now that we have the painting well underway, let's talk a little bit more about what it means to be aromantic. I want to preface this with the fact that I am about as far away from aromantic as it gets, so please know I will do my best to share some general information, but I am by no means an expert. If you have questions about being aromantic, I suggest that you look up some other content creators that are actually aromantic and can answer your questions a bit better. I'll leave some links in the description for you. Aromantic is defined as experiencing little to no romantic attraction or feelings towards others. This is different from sexual attraction, which we will be discussing during the second painting. Because it is separate from sexual orientation, aromantics can identify with a number of other labels, such as, but not limited to, being a, bi, pan, hetero, or homosexual. The label aromantic may not be as black and white as some other queer identifiers, and people who identify as aromantic exist on an extremely wide spectrum. Some people on the spectrum may experience rare or limited romantic attraction at some point in their lives, and therefore might prefer to use a term such as gray romantic. Others may experience romantic attraction only after they form deep emotional bonds with a partner and may prefer to use the term demi-romantic. There are a lot of other terms that fall under the umbrella spectrum of being aromantic, so if you're curious, I'll leave those links in the description for you. Aromanticism is one of the lesser represented queer identifiers, and aros often face stigma from the general population. I cannot speak for any aros, as I mentioned before, but I want to make it clear that aros are not simply just afraid of intimacy, they're not cold or heartless or any other hurtful things that people might associate with other people who don't form romantic attachments. Not everyone desires exclusive, long-term romantic relationships, and society ought to do a better job at recognizing that. For the stripes on the tail, I want a nice blend of hard and soft edges. Much like the feathers, we are going in with wet paint on dry paper and then softening off only the edges that we want to blend. As we moved to more defined spots and stripes on the legs, I'll use less of that softening off technique to keep the shapes more intact. As we finish the final details, I want to remind you all that World Watercolor Month officially begins tomorrow if you're watching this on the day that the video comes out. For anyone new to watercolors, every July the community celebrates the hobby and spreads awareness for the importance of art around the world. Each year, there is an official prompt list if you would like to participate in daily challenges. However, the challenge is not a requirement of participating in the event. Anytime you post a watercolor piece to social media during July, make sure to use the hashtag World Watercolor Month and World Watercolor Month 2024 to connect to others in the community. There's also an official World Watercolor Month shop that artist ambassadors, including myself, donate their artwork to for zipper bags and mugs to be sold throughout the month. 100% of the profits from these sales are donated to the International Child Art Foundation. This video is not sponsored in any way. I have just been an artist ambassador for World Watercolor Month since 2018, and I continue to do so every year to help raise funds for this organization that fosters creativity in young people around the world. I hope if you can that you'll check it out. Alrighty, next up is the asexual flag, ACES for short. We are using a similar color palette, but we're going to be swapping out those two greens for a bright, warm purple. The idea for this piece came to me immediately, and I had no question about the type of animal that I wanted to paint. Dragons are generally regarded around the internet as the ace mascot, so that is what we are going with. Like dragons, magpies love shiny things. I picked out a couple of magpie species that I thought would work well, along with some of my favorite serpenty-like dragons from other artists. I really liked the more bird-like sketch on the right, but I felt like it was too derivative of one of the dragons on my board, and I didn't want to lift that artist's interpretation of dragons. So I went with the more dragony dragon. I applied the color blocking from the black-billed magpie on the wings and the black-throated magpie jay for the head. Alrighty, now that we've got the painting underway, let's talk aces. Similarly to aromantics, asexuals in the queer world, not the biological world, is defined by a lack of experiencing sexual attraction or desire. Also, similarly to aromantics, asexuality exists on an extremely wide spectrum and unfortunately also faces a number of social stigmas. Those who identify as asexual may choose to embrace more specific labels, such as graysexual or demisexual, with the prefixes meaning the same things that they meant before when I talked about them. It is important to clarify that being asexual is not the same thing as being celibate or abstinent. A lack of sexual attraction or interest is not the same as choosing not to partake in certain activities. Just like any other person on the planet, people who identify as ace have different preferences for the level of physical touch that they are comfortable with. In a platonic situation, some people like hugs and some don't. Aces may be aromantic, commonly referred to as aro ace, which is why I mentioned at the top of the video that sometimes these go hand in hand, or they might be alloromantic, which means having romantic relationships that may or may not involve touch with a partner. And within those romantic relationships, they might be gay, straight, bi, pan, etc. in nature. I cannot dive too much further into this subject as I myself am not ace, but more than anything, I just want to share that these labels exist so that people can self-identify in a way that resonates with them, and people can use multiple labels depending on how they identify. It is common for me to get sometimes nasty pushback on these Pride videos, but please let me reiterate that if something doesn't resonate with you personally, that's fine. However, that doesn't mean you can or should invalidate how others feel and view themselves. We all have different experiences, wants, hopes, desires, relationships, friendships, etc., and it in no way hurts you to let someone else live as their truest self. So please be kind and respectful to others. If you're not, in my comment section, I will just delete your comment. While I have grown to tolerate the negative feedback and choose to continue making these videos, others reading the comments did not ask to be hurt by hateful words. So I'm just not going to tolerate it. Alrighty, so back to our Magpie Dragon. The Ace community at large seems to have embraced the dragon as their mascot. I've seen various reasons for this, from collecting all the shinies, because, when you don't have the complications of a physical relationship, you have a lot more time for your favorite hobbies, to dragons are just way cooler than the alternative thing that we're talking about here. As for the magpie, magpies also love shiny baubles. Most corvids do in general, but as I mentioned earlier in the video, the magpie's colorations lend themselves well to having these distinct blocks of color to replicate the flag. I'm going to be honest, painting wings always scares the crap out of me. We talked about that a little bit for the last painting. And with such high contrast in this particular painting, I was pretty timid going into this one. In general, I used way more brushes than I usually do for a single painting, and I also ended up overworking the head, unrelatedly. But at the end of the day, I am pretty happy with how this little burb dragon turned out. Both of these paintings are available as prints and stickers on Etsy. They're also available with bold color backgrounds on Redbubble, on merch such as tote bags and zipper bags. The whole Pride collection over on Redbubble was updated so that many of the pieces have the flag colors as options in the background. In addition to those updates, there are some new stickers and restocked prints over on Etsy, and today is the last day to get the Battlelure Eagles over on Patreon. As always, I want to thank my patrons for your support. As you all know, it means the world to me that I am able to keep doing this because of you. I am so sorry to the entire queer community that this is coming out late once again. I promise I started preparations for this back in January. I knew what I was going to do. It has just taken me forever to edit this footage. So happy Pride. I hope you had a great month. I hope you continue to have a wonderful year. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, happy painting.